I want to hear cannons. Three-step drop, goes on the end zone. Caught ball, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans reaches up with one hand and grabs it in. Here they go again. Tim Bomo dropping the throw. Winston out again, throws to the left. It's intercepted at the 35. Outside the numbers to the 40, to the 35, to the 30, to the 25, to the 20, to the 15-10. Mike Edwards, touchdown Tampa Bay. That's the dagger, my friend.
This is the Big Nasty. Yeah, Big Nasty. Hall of Fame Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan, baby.
This is Mike Allstott, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you're listening to the Cannon Fire Podcast.
Cannon Fire Podcast, brother. You ain't listening, and you're missing out. Woo!
And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to a Victory Tuesday edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I am your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Mr. Evan Wanish. So, 17-16, your final score on Monday Night Football. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers victorious against the New Orleans Saints, not just once, but twice in a season. They've officially swept New Orleans, got the monkey off their back, if you will. I know this year has been all types of disappointing, but if there is one thing that can somewhat make up for it, it is finally conquering this New Orleans team. It took some late-game heroics from Tom Brady and the offense, and I'll tell you, as good as this feels, I mean, as great as I feel. I was at the game in person, which is why we didn't have a live show after last night. Got home pretty late. Had to go to work this morning on 2-3 hours of sleep, but it was worth it. It did feel well worth it. But I'll tell you what, some Tom Brady late-game heroics really does a good job of forgetting how 95% of that game made me feel because, I mean, you know, for the people who were there in attendance, unfortunately, some of those jump ship chumps were filing their way out of the exits, and we stayed until the bitter end. And with 8 seconds left to go, he finds Rachaad White in the end zone. Had to basically win the game twice. We'll talk about that as well. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 6-6 and have finally swept the New Orleans Saints for the first time since 2007. It has been a decade and a half since the Bucs have done this. So pretty historic, if you will. Evan, your thoughts on the game overall?
Yeah, it was very similar, actually, to the one I was at. Very similar to the Rams game, I feel like, where, just like you said, 95% of the game, like, didn't play very well. But, like, the other team didn't play very well either and sort of always left the door open for the Bucs. And then at the end, you know, in that final drive, they're able to take advantage of some things. So this one obviously is more impressive when you're down 13, you know, with 3 minutes to go. You're assuming it's a loss, you know, most likely. So we'll get into all of it, obviously, but yeah, really a big win because if you were looking at it, you know, I think a lot of people sort of late in the fourth assumed it was going to be a loss, and you were okay. It's fair to assume that, right? Like I said, when you're down like that, the way the offense was playing, it wasn't like the offense was showing much life. You didn't really have much hope that they were going to be able to score against the Saints. So you were thinking, man, you know, they dropped this game, and then they got San Francisco and then Cincinnati. You know, you could be looking at 5-9 or whatever before you know it. So I mean, I think this win was big just for a confidence standpoint, obviously for a mentality standpoint that, you know, you're 6-6 now. There's a big difference between 6-6 and 5-7. So I think that's a big thing for this team.
Yeah, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are not a team who has had a positive record since week 3 of the NFL season when they finished 2-1. And I mean, that's the best they have been. That's the best they have been. They have not had a positive record since then. They fell to 2-2 and then 2-3, and it just got worse from there. But we are talking about a victory today, so I want to talk about the good things as well before we really, you know, really tear this coaching staff to shreds. Because you want to talk about coward ball, there was a hell of a lot of that on display on Monday Night Football. But I'll tell you one of the things that I really did like about this win, especially the game-winning drive, is that it was a little bit of everybody, right? You know, I know that we credit the defense and we credit Tom Brady first and foremost, but Rachaad White, game-winning touchdown. Cade Otton, important touchdown to get the Bucs back in this game. Julio Jones, probably the best catch of the year. I know week 1 probably a little overrated at this point because it knocked him out of commission for 5 weeks. But, that was one hell of a catch from Julio Jones. Like, it looked like a vintage Julio catch. And I know that I'm not going to overreact like I did after week 1. It's just really cool to see Julio Jones making plays in a Buccaneers uniform. But, Julio got active. Mike Evans, who kind of, had some issues first 3 quarters, he got involved late in that game, had a couple of contested catches. That was good to see. Rashad White, I know I already mentioned him as well. Kate Otten playing well. Chris Godwin had one hell of a game. I think finished as the leading receiver. We'll pull up the box score here in a minute. But let's talk about the offensive line because they're not going to get any credit today, at least from people who want to gloss over stuff like that. I know they weren't the best, and maybe we can start to talk about this here as we break down the game. I still don't entirely think Tom Brady trusts this offensive line as much as he did last year, and the reason is simple. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why. But I do think Brady does maybe get the yips every now and again, maybe throw the ball away a little bit too early. We talked about this on the pregame show with James Hill. But, realistically, I thought Cam Jordan was out there. This Saints defensive front usually always gets to Tom Brady. And if I'm not mistaken, he only went down 2 or 3 times last night. And in the grand scheme of things, I didn't think they were too terrible, especially with Josh Wells being your starting right tackle. I thought he played well.
Yeah, I think it could have been worse. We've seen it worse, I think, specifically against this New Orleans team. And the Bucs did a better job. Brady obviously did a better job of getting the ball out quick. Do believe sometimes last night I didn't really think it was that case, but at times during the season, just like we talked about, one of the issues with the offense has been Brady kind of getting a little too happy, getting a little too much happy feet in there and getting rid of the ball maybe a second or two earlier than you should. Trust your offensive line a little bit more, hold on to that ball for another second, have something else develop. But I thought last night they did a fine job of that. A lot of checkdowns still. The guards, the interior line didn't play great. I didn't think, specifically Nick Leverett got pushed back a couple of times. I don't think he allowed a sack, but there was a few pressures he allowed, which caused some checkdowns. But, it's a lot of the same issues on offense, which is why, you can be happy about the win, but overall, the process still isn't great. And we know it's a win and stuff, and we're not here to be all Debbie Downer right now. But, at the same time, like, the offense has to be better if they want to do anything serious, right? Because if this offense doesn't change, then like, okay, the win's nice, but like, it's not going to mean anything in the grand scheme of things.
Right. And the general lack of urgency is something we have talked about so far this season a lot, because this Bucs team right now, if you had to pinpoint one major issue, I mean, there's a lot, but if you had to pinpoint one that outweighs the others, it's an offense that can't score any points. And that seemed to be an issue again for Tampa Bay. Just like we had talked about, less than 5 minutes left to go in the game, and the score is 17-3. It's one of those things.
16.
Where 16-3, excuse me. You got to be realistic with yourself and say, do I trust this offense right now to drive the field? Not once, but twice. And also for your defense to play well enough to get the ball back, which, to be honest, let's give the defense the credit they deserve. They're the only reason the Bucs were in that game. Let's face it.
Yeah, I mean, the New Orleans offense isn't a juggernaut, but yeah, the defense did their job, and specifically when the Bucs scored that touchdown, and then the defense need to get a stop, and they need to get a 3 and out, because one first down by the Saints, the Bucs might have gotten the ball back if the Saints convert a first down, but there wouldn't have been much time left, and the Bucs wouldn't have had any timeouts. Wow. So that would have been pretty tough. So the defense stood tall. Carl Nassib obviously with a big sack, Keanu Neal with a big time breakup. I thought Neal played really well.
He's been balling out, and Logan Ryan, his presence, his return was certainly felt as well. I thought the safety position looked much better than we had anticipated coming into this.
Yeah, so I think both those guys stepped up, and even the defense. I think the Bucs, the Saints ended up with the ball. It was late. It might have been the drive before the Bucs' first touchdown, where the Saints ended up with the ball. And they only really needed a few yards to get in the field goal range, and the Bucs still forced them to punt. So that was big as well. Yeah, the defense, like I said, the Saints' offense isn't anything special, but the defense did their job. And I think the only thing you can seriously complain about still is the lack of turnovers.
I
And
thought,
they're not even really close to getting turnovers. That's the frustrating thing.
yeah,
Like, it's not like their corners are dropping balls or making plays on balls. Like, they're
they're
not.
just not even anywhere close to the play.
Yeah, like they're not really close to getting turnovers, so like they can't even really luck in any of them. That's frustrating. But overall, yeah, you're right. Like if the defense collapses even one time down the stretch there, the Bucks don't win this game.
Listen, I don't want to praise the defense and then immediately criticize them, but for this instance, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I thought, my biggest gripe with the defense last night, and maybe you'll agree with me as well, I just thought the pass rush was bad. Like the Levante David sack early, the Carl Nassib sack later in the game ultimately ended up keeping the Bucks in things, but it did feel like Andy Dalton was 20 for 28, 229 yards and a touchdown. And yeah, it could have been much worse, but it just felt like there were so many times where he would drop back to pass and he'd have 3, 4, 5 seconds to really look around, go through his progressions, and there wouldn't be a Buccaneer in sight, and a couple of times it'd be a situation where, let's say you have an outside linebacker drop back into coverage. I think it may have been Anthony Nelson this one time in particular, but I could be misremembering, but he's dropped back in coverage. You've got a wide receiver running a drag route, and then Anthony Nelson sees Andy Dalton with nobody around him. So he says, you know what, maybe try and close the gap between me and this quarterback. Pass goes right up over his head. It's complete for a first down. And it's one of those things where like that happens a few times a game and it can be acceptable. You're not going to stop every single offense in the NFL from getting a first down, moving the chains. It is what it is. They held New Orleans to 17 or 16 points. And by the way, this Bucs defense so far up until this point in the season, top 5 in the league as far as their defense is to holding teams to not score points. I probably could have said that a little bit better, but
points per game.
Yeah. But I thought the pass rush was a little irritating last night. Felt hit or miss, but overall, with the secondary as shorthanded as it was, I mean, those guys balled out. Just got to give them more credit.
Yeah, and like I said, they don't win. Obviously, $2 super chat from Mr. Bucks Nation. You already know I'm here. Not sure why you aren't at work, but
oh no, he is at work. He's just he's just wasting company time.
Off. He's wasting money on company time. Well, it's not wasting money if you're giving it to me. If you're giving it to anything else, then it's wasting money. But happy you're here, I guess. Yeah, I thought, like I said, the defense, if they collapse once, like if they allow a touchdown or they allow a field goal, like the game's over, so they did a lot of the right things. And the Saints got down there a few times. The Saints had to settle for some short field goals. I believe one was a 21-yarder, the other being a 29-yarder. So it wasn't like, the Bucs were really playing, the bend, don't break style of defense. And, that's going to be able to work. And it, similar to the Rams game, very similar. They didn't give up the back-breaking play, and I think that's a big deal. Cleveland last week, in that 4th down play, it's a great play by Njoku, but that's a backbreaker. You had a chance just to win the game right there. And this time the defense didn't give up that play. So I thought, like I said, without the defense playing the way they do, the Bucs don't have a chance because the offense was. Besides the first drive of the game and then the last 2 drives of the game, the offense was non-existent. There was no juice, there was no life, and the defense really brought it for them.
I've got a lot to say about the first drive of the game. We'll talk about the offense here in a minute. But yeah, I just wanted to show some more recognition for this defense. I think, the general consensus with everyone who watched the game on Monday night, and so far this season, game after game, week after week, win, lose, or draw, it feels like the defense has been playing well enough to win pretty much every week, aside from maybe Kansas City. And the only reason they got behind so quickly in that one was because of special teams mistakes. So it's like, you got to take the good and the bad, but I think this Buccaneers defense has been better realistically. I don't know if this is a hot take at this point in the season, but I think this Bucs defense, as it is right now, is probably better than the defense they had on the field in 2020, 2021.
Less explosive, but
much more effective. Like just shutting teams down, neutralizing offenses.
Pass rush isn't as, but at the same time, like they don't have Shaq Barrett anymore either. So like that kind of hurts as well. So you kind of have to be a little bit more fair there. But obviously against the run, not as effective, but the run defense has been fine. They got gashed in Cleveland last week, but the run defense did what they had to do against New Orleans. So, and I mean, New Orleans has been a team where a lot of the times the game gets away from the Bucks because New Orleans can control the clock. And can just waste a lot of time by running it short and having, getting the second and shorts, the third and shorts, and then dumping it off for 5-6 yards on a pass to get the first down, then do it again on the next series. So that's why New Orleans has really been able to take control of a lot of these games, and the Bucks didn't do that. The Bucks forced them into a couple third and longs, and they got some punts on the way. So I thought, like I said, the defense's day was really good, and I'm going to reiterate again, like they don't win if the defense it doesn't play the way they do, especially in the red zone, because like I said, the Saints had to settle for some field goals where, if it's a touchdown, that's probably a game. So I thought, the defense had a very nice day. Guys like we mentioned, Keanu Neal, I thought stepped up. Carl Nassib had a nice day, obviously with that sack. But I thought when he had that sack, it was close because he almost had helmet to helmet on Dalton, and I was like, "Oh, are they going to throw that?"
See that?
Because it was close. And like you know how they are with roughing the passer calls nowadays.
Hey, and listen, I know we talk about officiating. Before we dive into the offense here, I did want to not necessarily give a shout out, but it did seem like the Bucks played a little bit of a cleaner game. I know that Donovan Smith call at the very end we're going to talk about, but I thought what the referees did from the beginning of this game was it seems like whenever the Bucks play New Orleans, and maybe the last 2 years, maybe eventually I'm going to sound crazy for using these as examples, but it seems like in Tampa especially, like when they lost 9-0, it was physical football. Like New Orleans is a physical team. When Marshawn Lattimore, who was out, but usually whatever corner they have lined up against Mike Evans is going to mug him at the line of scrimmage to try and prevent him from making a play. And I think New Orleans is one of those teams that does that more than the average team the Bucks would have on their schedule. And it seemed like right away from the first quarter last night, there were a couple of holding calls, pass interference on New Orleans. And I think the refs were maybe a little more prepared for that than I thought they would be. Like there were a couple of calls that I was surprised that they made, but at the end of the day, it only helped Tampa Bay because you don't get calls like that very often against a team like New Orleans. They're a very physical team, and they get away with that stuff a lot.
Yeah, and just like you said, and I think we talked about in the pregame show, talked about staying disciplined, right? And the Bucks only had 4 penalties on the day. The Saints had 6. The Bucks had 4. So, we talk about staying disciplined, and the penalty, against the Saints on that Mike Evans deep ball helped set up the first touchdown. Like, if that's not a penalty, like, if that play doesn't happen, do the Bucks even score a touchdown? Like they were so dead at that point. Like, did that give them the life? Did that give them the juice that they needed? So, I mean, I thought the referees were fine. They didn't like impact the game. Like, oh, it was a terrible call. Like, there's a few calls I was like, like the Donovan Smith call, the hold at the end, like that's the right call.
I mean, he was tackling. He was tackling,
he
dude.
he got called for a hold earlier in the game, which I didn't agree with. I didn't think it was a hold, but that one, that was the right call. But and we'll get into Donovan Smith. So I still think they were quiet for a while, but now he's had 2 bad games, and everybody wants to say he's the worst left tackle.
Well, of course. Well, buddy.
Yeah,
buddy. Yeah.
But so I mean, the rest were fine, and the Bucks, like most importantly, they stayed disciplined. They didn't let the emotions get the best of them in this game, because against the Saints, that happens quite a bit. So I think that was a good sign.
Yeah. Check on the live chat really quick. Our buddy Pat McGroin checking in. Rock813, Adam Coate. Of course, Mr. Bucks Nation with the $2 super chat. Edwin Hernandez, Frank G, Big Juicy, Will the Brewer, Brian Shaw, Joel Elrican. Really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. Slim Stank also here. Happy Monday, boys. Brian Shaw says the Bucks defense is going to need to force Mr. Irrelevant into multiple turnovers versus the 49ers. And if they can do that, Bucks can win. We'll talk about that on the game preview show later this week. Joel says, hello, Rhett and Evan. Go Bucks, my friend. Adam says, Kamara barely had any yards. Absolutely credit the defense. I thought, New Orleans offense has not been a juggernaut, but Alvin Kamara, he's one of those guys where if he can get the ball in his hands, he's going to make a play, and he wasn't making too many of those on Monday night. An ugly win is still a win. F the Saints, says our buddy Will Brewer. All right.
Also, the thing about it, and one more thing about the defense before we completely move on to the offense, like Chris Olave played, and you wouldn't really even realize it.
Well,
Chris Olave has been very good for the Saints this year, and the Bucks were, I mean, able to neutralize him pretty well. I mean, I'm looking
he did
at
have that
it.
one. He did have that one drop, and that bailed us the hell out. Like, I mean,
he had four catches for 65 yards. Like, Olave's been doing, like, he wasn't even the Saints' leading receiver. It was that Shaheed guy.
Yeah.
And he had the one long play, the 40-yarder. And then he had 4 catches for 75 yards, but one of them was 40 yards. So that's 3 catches for 35 yards if you take that away. So I thought, the Bucs secondary, a depleted secondary, did a pretty nice job.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the offensive side of the ball. We'll start things off with the man of the hour, the quarterback, TB12, Tom Brady, whatever you want to call him at this point, the GOAT. His stat line looks like this: 36 for 54, 281 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Thought he was going to have 2 picks on the game for the first time this year, but luckily that was overturned. It did not end up happening. But what did you think of Brady's performance? I know the first 3 quarters didn't look awesome, but we saw TB12 do TB12 things at the end of this game, and as much as I hate to sound like a Brady fanboy here, that's all I needed to see to realize he still got some juice.
We know who he is, right? If you've been watching close enough, like, he still has it. Like, it's not lost. Up until the fourth quarter, though, I thought this was his worst game of the year. I didn't think he was very good.
Not to interrupt you, but there was a guy in front of me, third quarter, and it was actually right after the interception. A guy in front of me, I watched him on his phone text his friend and say, "Yep, he's done. We're watching it happen in real time. We're watching the collapse of Tom Brady in person right now." And I was so bummed for the next few minutes. I didn't know what to think or how to process. All things end up coming out in the wash, but you could tell how a lot of people felt last night through a whole lot of this game.
Yeah, so I mean, the interception he had, I'm not sure. I just don't think he saw Demario Davis. Like, it's a mistake. Like,
it's just a bad throw. Like,
but I don't know. That can't happen there right before halftime. You let the Saints get some points before half. Would have been a 7-3 ball game, or maybe even 7-6, 10-7. Who knows? You were almost at midfield there before halftime. So, missed a few deep balls. The Miller one was a little bit underthrown. I thought it might have been pass interference, but it was still underthrown. The Julio one, I saw a lot of people complaining. They're like, "Oh, he had Mike Evans open. He threw it to Julio Jones." Julio Jones was open too. It's not like Julio Jones was completely covered and he threw it to a covered Julio Jones with an open Mike Evans there. Julio was open. Brady just missed him. So I didn't think he was that great up until, honestly, I mean, I'd say the fourth quarter, but until the final 2 drives of the fourth quarter. And he did what he needed to do. He was, was he spectacular? No, but when he needed to be, he was. And that's all that matters. And that's what you've seen a lot of the time with him. And again, this was almost an exact replica of the Rams game. I mean, literally almost an exact replica of the Rams game. So, he played very well, pretty much the same. I mean, besides the one turnover, he played a very similar game to that. So, when it mattered, he stepped up and, they're able to get the win. So, was it perfect? No, I didn't think, like I said, didn't think he was very good. And I was going to come on here and say, before this, I thought the Baltimore game was probably his worst. This one, I thought was worse than that, but when you come away with a win on the 2 drives and make some of the throws that you did, it definitely helps. So he was able to bounce back, and that's all that matters.
Let me ask you a question, and honestly, at this point, it's just kind of for shits and giggles. There's a narrative about Tom Brady. There are multiple narratives about Tom Brady. There's always been a ton, but one of the narratives is that, yeah, he's legitimately lost a step. He is cooked. He is not what he was last year and the year before. So let me ask you a question. You just talked about the Baltimore game maybe being his worst game. Then you talked about last night. The win changes it a little bit, but for the most part, it was still not his best game. I mean, maybe he is just a victim of this offense and Byron Leftwich's play calling, which we'll get to here in a minute. But have you noticed a trend of seeing more bad games than usual, or am I just overthinking it, and that's just because he's in a bad offense right now?
I think it looks worse because he's in a bad offense.
He also threw the ball 54 times, which is
Yeah.
never ideal.
Yeah. It's has he been as good as he was in 2020 and 2021? No. I think 2021 was his best. The second year was his best, but um he hasn't been as good. That is a fact. Has he been bad though? No, I don't think he's been bad. He has had some subpar games. I think you can. I'm not going to sit here and dissect every single, every single matchup here this year, but the facts are the facts. I mean, he hasn't had the same offensive line. The offensive line. I think I talked about this on the preview
On the
show as
pregame.
well, that the offensive line's getting way too much hate. Like, people think it's like the worst offensive line in the league. Go watch some other.
I mean, go
teams
watch
then.
Cincinnati, who
Yeah,
just dumped how much money into their offensive line, taking
yeah,
away
their
Alex
offensive
Kappa.
line has improved though, because they're getting hot at the
I mean, it's improved, but Joe Burrow's still getting his ass kicked.
But go watch some of these other offensive lines, and you tell me if Tampa's is the worst. Has it been as good? No. Like, obviously, it's not gonna be as good. Like, that shouldn't have been an expectation. And especially on Monday night, when the only starter from last year that was active on Monday night was Donovan Smith. That's it. So, I think the expectations for the offensive line before the season, especially once Jensen went down, were a little too high. I think, which is weird because a lot of people were worried about that before the season, and now they're like, "Oh, the offensive line sucks." Well,
You
okay, if you expected it, why are you so concerned about it?
don't know what you got till it's gone, buddy. I mean,
Yeah,
they wrote songs about that.
Yeah, they did. They did a very famous song.
Mm-hmm.
So we could turn this into karaoke if we wanted to.
Oh,
But
you should have had a hot mic going before the show. We were
I know
jamming,
he was,
dude.
man, oh man. Shout out Applebee's. Not a sponsor, but good commercials. Yeah, but has he had as great a year? No, he hasn't. But at the same time, the offensive line being shuffled, Julio Jones being in and out of the lineup, Chris Godwin still trying to recover from a major injury, Russell Gage being in and out of the lineup, trying to work in two rookies, Rashad White and Kate Otten, not having Gronkowski. Like, there's a lot of things. And also, we haven't really talked about it much. We're not going to talk about it much, but it's all field stuff. It's something that's going to be there. No matter how much you don't want it to be a distraction, it's going to be. It's just natural. It's human. It's human nature. So I don't think he's been as good. However, I certainly don't think he's bad. And without him, they're probably like a 3 or 2 win team right now. So yeah, I think he's done his job. And I think with a healthier offensive line, healthier weapons for a whole season, I think you would see a better version of Tom Brady. And the play calling also hasn't helped. Like, a lot of the play calling is still too conservative, and I think that that hasn't helped. But at the same time, players got to execute, and at times Brady has not executed as well as he has in the past.
Yeah, and he's been accountable about that. That's the thing too that I want to kind of footnote on this. His press conference last night, he admitted that he wasn't playing as well as he needed to. He made some mistakes early, had some bad throws. Like, that's how you take accountability. And he put the team first. That's what's most important at the end of the day. And I think most of the locker room knows that. Hopefully, with Tom Brady back at 6-6 with this Tampa Bay roster, maybe he can light a fire under somebody's ass and they can, go look like the team we know and love against San Francisco next week. But we just have to wait and see. Now, let's talk about the run game for the Bucs before we talk about the play calling. Only 19 run plays for the Bucs on Monday Night Football. It certainly didn't feel like it, but they did kind of abandon the run at the end of the third and fourth quarter. Leonard Fournette.
To be fair, they're down most of that.
Yeah, they're down 2 possessions. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Leonard Fournette made his return. Big number 7 out there. 10 carries for 49 yards, averaging 4.9 yards a tote. It's one of those things where, like, he ran the ball better than I thought he did. It really is one of those things where if you have a running back who finishes the day anywhere from 3.5 to 5 yards per carry, like, that's one hell of a productive day. And with only 10 carries, 49 yards, I mean, if you give him 10 more carries, probably breaking 100, maybe. Bucs weren't in a situation to give him 10 more carries, but I thought he played well. And of course, Rashad White, the other running back there, 9 carries and 28 yards. Now, both of those guys, Rachaad White caught the ball 6 times for 41 yards and the game-winning touchdown. Leonard Fournette caught the ball 6 times for 32 yards. I know we talked about Leonard Fournette, just put him over running the ball, but Rachaad White is going to be so goddamn good at football, dude.
Yeah, I think he could be. Need to see a little bit more consistency, running the actual ball. I think he could be a really perfect third down back though. And he's proved that in the receiving game for sure. It was sort of more like a 60-40 split. Fournette had most of the carries or most of the snaps, I should say. So going forward, I would probably like to see that. Because at the same time, I know money shouldn't dictate playing time, but you did just pay Leonard Fournette, so he should be playing more than Rachaad White. Even though the situations he should be playing in, that's something that can change. But as far as actual snaps go, I do think he should be playing a bit more than Rachaad White. So, yeah, it's good to see. And the Bucs rookies these past few weeks have really stepped up. Rachaad White, Cade Otton, obviously the 2 touchdown catches, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last 3 touchdown catches by a Buccaneer have been by a Buccaneer rookie. O'Keefe the last week in Cleveland, Cade Otton, Rachaad White last night. So, and then you look at the one in versus LA, Cade Otton catches the game-winning touchdown as well. So, yeah, I think the rookie class is finally starting to step up, and it's important, I think, for the offense. And the offense has looked better at times, and I think it's when they involve guys like Cade Otton and Rachaad White. So it's up to the coaching staff to work them in a bit more. I mean, Cameron Brate, he's a longtime Buck or whatever, I'll appreciate him. But right now, the best option for this team is Cade Otton. It's not Cameron Brate. It's simple. And he didn't play last night. He had an illness. But Cade Otton right now is a better option for this offense than Cameron Brate is. It sucks, but Brate's getting older. He never was an athletic guy to begin with, and he's lost a little bit of juice. So I mean, at this point, you got to roll with Otton.
Let's talk about the other receiving leaders before we talk about the play calling here. I want to get all the good out of the way before we piss everybody off to wrap up the show. So Chris Godwin, your leading receiver, 8 catches and 63 yards on the evening. Mike Evans, 4 catches for 59. Rachaad White, 6 catches, 41. Lenny had 6 for 32. Cade Otton, 6 catches for 28. Julio Jones, 3 catches for 28. Former Atlanta Falcon, 3 catches, 28 yards from one Tom Brady. Just an interesting note there for no particular reason. Number 41, O'Keefe, 1 catch for 12 yards. Russell Gage had a catch as well for 11 yards. And Scotty Miller had a clutch first down reception for 7 yards. All right. Let's get to the moment that we have all been waiting for. We will keep the conversation on the offense because I want to talk about the first drive of the game for Tampa Bay. So I got to tell you, I loved 90% of that drive. I did. Realistically,
you should. They got down to the 5-yard line.
Yeah. Got all the way down to the red zone. Took about 8 minutes off of the clock. Literally, New Orleans did not get the ball until halfway through, more than halfway through the first quarter of that ball game. They were converting short yardage. It was short, quick passing. The run game was complimentary. We saw some play action. It wasn't perfect, but they got the hell down the field. And then here's what we saw. And this is where I drew the line. This is where I had decided that I have seen enough. So we get down, scoring position. Bucs are in the red zone for the first time today. What do we see? We see an inside handoff. We see a screen pass. And then we see another pass to a running back behind the line of scrimmage. Why the fuck can Byron Leftwich not draw up some plays that allow Tom Brady to target the end zone? I cannot remember the last time I saw Tom Brady actually throw the ball towards the end zone. Am I losing my mind? Fourth quarter, I know. But this is a game that very well could have started at least 10-0, 10-3, Bucs in favor. It's one of those things where this is an offense that can't score any points, and we're seeing week in and week out why they can't score any points, because this red zone play calling is atrocious, and it's not getting any better. They're not making any adjustments. They aren't changing anything. We saw the same sequence of plays last week against Cleveland. Now, granted, they were all the way down at the other end of the field. Wasn't like they were in scoring position. But if you want to take 20 seconds off of the clock and get the hell off of the field in the fastest third and out we've ever seen, then go ahead and run it up the gut and throw 2 screen passes back to back. I don't know why the fuck they keep doing that, Evan.
So here's the thing. 16 play drive that is takes off at 8 minutes and 35 seconds, 72 yards. That should never end in a field goal. It really shouldn't end in a field goal. But however, this is where I don't agree with the play calling, right? However, this is where execution comes into play as well. Julio on the Chris Godwin screen. If Julio Jones blocks the right guy, Chris Godwin's in for a touchdown. If they showed it on the broadcast, and Troy Aikman and Joe Buck both pointed that out. Like Julio Jones kind of ran into Chris Godwin, where if he would have gotten his man on the outside, Chris Godwin would have walked in for a touchdown.
Yeah, we were watching that one live too. I remember they ran into each other, and everybody in our section went, "Oh,
yeah." So that's a touchdown. So that's execution. Not a great play call. It's certainly not. And I agree with 99% of what you said. But it's execution, I think, matters a little bit there. Leonard Fournette. And this is where I talk about how Leonard Fournette should be out snapping Rashad White, but the situations Leonard Fournette should be in should be different. That should have been Rashad White if you're going to do that type of play.
Yeah.
If you're going to, I actually thought that Fournette should have broke that tackle too. But like Rashad White's better at that. So I think that's a situation where Rashad White should be in. I think the play calls suck there. Sure. And I've been very critical. I think, I've been more critical of the coaching staff than I think you have to this point. But I agree that the play calling in the red zone has been an issue. And that's why
it's just,
that's why they suck in the red zone. Yes, not having Rob Gronkowski hurts. Not having a completely healthy offensive line hurts. But at the same time, like you have Mike Evans, you have Julio Jones, and 2 guys that could win you a 50-50 ball. And you don't throw anything to have that, right? Like have Mike Evans box out a dude. Like he's 6'5". Like have him box out a dude just like basketball. Have him box out a dude, just go get the ball. So I thought that the play calling wasn't great. However, the execution also wasn't there. So it was kind of a worst of both worlds there for the Bucs on that drive.
Right. And we've talked all year long about how this Buccaneers team has just been a special cocktail of suck. Like it's not one particular thing that's overpowering the rest of the mix. You can usually throw something at the wall and it'll stick, but it's one of those things too that the biggest thing I worry about with this coaching staff, and I think this has already been on display for a while. I was going to cut you off and I was going to tell you that the red zone play calling has sucked all year. This isn't a new development. It wasn't like they were scoring points first 4 weeks of the season and they just forgot how. They have always sucked. And there hasn't been any adjustments. And complacency is the biggest thing that kills me about this coaching staff. With not just Byron Leftwich, with Todd Bowles as well. A good point that I saw made is that this coaching staff so far this year, every good decision they have made for the better of the team is because they were forced to do it. They were forced to make a change at left guard because Luke Gedeke got hurt. I mean, if he didn't get hurt, who's to say he wouldn't have been out there last night stinking it up, right? I mean, he's ready to go. He was active last night, could have gone in the game had he had to, but his time will come, I guess. But they were forced into making a change at running back. Leonard Fournette goes down. All of a sudden, we find out just how great Rashad White is, right? Because Lenny was not getting it done offensively for this team. The run game, it hasn't been working. And yes, Lenny ran the ball a little bit better last night, but in the grand scheme of things, for a Bucs team who has tried to run the ball this year, they're still one of the worst teams in history at doing so. They have been forced to throw the ball. I mean, let's face it. The last 5 minutes of the game last night, obviously you're playing from behind, but how many of those plays do you think Byron Leftwich called on Tom Brady's 2-minute drill, final drive of the game? Like, how much of that is Brady just taking control and running a no-huddle offense? Because when the Bucs run no-huddle, Tom Brady is one of the best statistical quarterbacks in the NFL this year, the year before that. I mean, it doesn't feel like they're making any sort of honest attempt at putting these guys in better positions to go out there and make plays.
No, I agree. I wrote a few days ago on Bucs Nation that, should Todd Bowles be on the hot seat? And one of the reasons that I said yes was because of the stubbornness to keep Byron Leftwich in his current role, because the offense wasn't working. Now, it's also execution. Byron Leftwich didn't go out there and miss Julio Jones open. Byron Leftwich didn't underthrow Scotty Miller. Byron Leftwich didn't tell Tom Brady to throw the ball right to DeMario Davis. So I mean, it's execution as well, but I think the biggest thing is coaching, and it's the play calling. When you talk about those things and using the players that you have in positions for them to succeed, I think that's where a lot of the frustration is with the lack of play action, the lack of first down throws, even though they throw it more on first down than people think.
Statistically, they're like second to last in the league on first down runs. But that's also just because they're averaging like the lowest amount of runs per game. So I guess it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and I don't know about the run game, but like their run game hasn't always been great. Like even when Bruce Arians the Bruce Arians offense, like, and I know it's not the exact same offense now, but like 2019 to 2021, like the running game wasn't great. Was it as bad? No, but like you could also say the Bucs had a better offensive line back then, so that helps as well. So, I think that the play calling is an issue, and it's something that's holding this team back. Now, in a 2-minute drill, you likely script out 3 or 4 plays that you can go to right away, So, I mean, I do think that Leftwich played a part in that, but you're right. I mean, because a lot of times when you're running no huddle, a lot of that stuff's on the fly, and a lot of that stuff is the quarterback looking at his sheet there and seeing what'll work. So when the Bucs are in no huddle, it seems to work, and I think they get better when they get into a rhythm.
Just run no huddle the whole game. Just the whole game. Just treat the whole game like a 2-minute drill.
Todd Bowles was asked about that today, and he did say that they might consider running, a bit more no huddle throughout the game, not just in 2-minute situations. But he also said that, you can't do it the whole game, which I agree. But he said your defense and special teams gets tired, which the special teams, I don't care about that, but the defense, sure, because everybody,
special teams is on the field the least. They need to suck it up.
Obviously, I saw it firsthand here in Philly, with Chip Kelly, his first year in 2013, everybody with the no huddle offense, everybody's like, oh my God, this is great. It started to fail because in 2014 they didn't have as much talent, and their no huddles would be 3 and outs, and the defense would be back on the field after 37 seconds. So it doesn't always work, but when you're able to get into a rhythm like that and be as productive as they've been, I think it's something you need to consider more. So, I hate to wrap this up. I want to wrap it up on a more positive note, but
I got one more rant to go on. Are you sure you want to save that positive note? It's not going to take too long. It's just one more thing I really wanted to complain about with this coaching staff, and you already know what's coming.
All right, go ahead.
All right. So late in the game, let me also just add some context here. I don't know if it was coming through on the broadcast, but for 75% of the game, I'd say anytime after the first quarter, the Bucs offense was getting booed off of the field every single possession. Every time they had to punt, they would get booed off the field. And the loudest boos of the night were in the fourth quarter, where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I mean, they're in their own territory, but when you're down 2 possessions with less than 10 minutes left to go in the game, you're probably going to have to go ahead and go for it, nut up or shut up on a 4th and 10. Well, the offense is on the field. The quarterback wants to go for it. So we take a commercial break's worth of time. I'm telling you, 3-4 minutes they were standing around on the field. And then here comes the punt unit. And I know that there are some statistical numbers I could show you right now. I don't have them offhand, but I saw that it was in the 99th percentile of cowardly punts on the NFL season so far, because there is a Twitter page dedicated to tracking stuff like that. And to be honest with you, that was your favorite term. That was coward ball. I mean, what the hell else was that? I felt like that was Todd Bowles officially waving the white flag, and he was telling me once again that he doesn't trust Tom Brady. And listen, it's not like 4th and 10 is a high percentage look, especially when you're on your own side of the field. Like if you go for it and you don't get it, New Orleans kicks a field goal and the game is most definitely over. But it did not feel like the right move at the time. And obviously hindsight's going to be 2020 because the Bucs came back and won. But it felt like a cowardly decision. It felt like Todd Bowles made that decision assuming they weren't going to win the game.
Well, I mean, I didn't think they're going to win the game either, but I still would have gone for it. Yeah, I would have gone there, and that's I think is most frustrating. The Bucks don't look unprepared to play week after week, so that's not like I think Todd Bowles has been done a
I
fine
do
job of getting them.
I do think they've been lacking a sense of urgency that they need, but I mean,
That's
guys
not
have been
unprepared to
playing,
play, though. Yeah, it's like that's not to me unprepared to play is you're taking undisciplined penalties. You look like you have no idea what's going on offense and on defense. But my biggest thing has been one clock management, sure, but clock management hasn't been as bad besides last week in Cleveland. But the aggressiveness has been there sort of all year, and I think last night, especially with Brady staying on the field and then saying no, like you're coming off a punt. I would have gone there. And it turns out, obviously, sure, it worked out for the best. But like, is it always going to work out? No, probably 90% of the time, that's not going to work out. So, because if the Saints were a better offense, they make you pay. If you're playing a better team, they make you pay probably. So, I do think that that's something that needs to get better. But with that being said, though, I wanted to wrap up. It's a win, right? I mean, we are talking about a win. You wouldn't think it.
We've seen ugly wins before, but like this was probably the ugliest win I've seen in a long time.
You wouldn't think it based on like how we've been talking, but they have won and they swept the Saints. So I mean that's got to be pretty sweet for that team. After not beating the Saints in 2019, 2020, 2021 to sweep them this year, that's gotta be pretty sweet. So you don't just have to hang your hat on the divisional round in 2020 anymore. Now you can talk about sweeping the Saints in 2022 as well.
How fitting is it that the year New Orleans gets swept?
Well,
the Bucks are just hot garbage.
The year the Bucks, I was talking to James last night. The year the Bucks sweep the Saints and beat the Rams, they can't beat anybody else.
Exactly.
It just so happens like the year they beat those two teams is the year they can't beat anyone else. So just like imagine the vibes right now if they had just beaten two of the three of the Panthers, Steelers, and Browns. Not all three, but
I mean, still
imagine if they just that'd be 8-4. Like you'd be sitting at 8-4 right now if you just win two of those three games. It's a completely different feel right now, but nonetheless, they already get the win. They're 6-6. They're in the lead in the NFC South, almost and basically ended the New Orleans season. I mean, New Orleans has a really uphill battle now to even try and win the NFC South, so that's always sweet as well.
And the funniest part is all it took, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So here's a spoiler: the Bucks are losing out. That's my prediction. They're not winning another game. It's over.
It's
in the season prediction show. I said the Saints were going to sweep them. We both picked them. You picked I think the Bucks week 2.
Well,
you ended up picking the Bucks against the Bucks this time, and I still maintained it. So, yeah.
That's the thing is that on the weekly episodes that we do, I don't remember if I picked them. I think the weekly episode week 2, I picked them to lose. But I'm pretty sure for the first time in podcast history, well, Cannon Fire podcast history, we've only been around for
no podcast history.
Yeah, first time in podcast history. We both picked the Bucks to lose in New Orleans, and that's all it took. So, I mean, I don't think that's happened before. I know that in the season predictions, we usually pick them to lose, but on a week-by-week basis, this is the first time that we both picked the Bucks to lose. And I never picked the Bucks to lose on this podcast. Ever. James was the only one to pick them to win on Thursday, on Sunday.
James was also wrong, though, because he said they weren't going to score a touchdown, but they were going to win.
Yeah, nothing but field goals. Oh, well. It is what it is.
Which they finally scored a touchdown. 2 touchdowns, obviously, for the first time in the Brady era against the Saints in Tampa. So.
Historic. But it is a great feeling nonetheless. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are 6-6, first place in the NFC South for another week in a row, and they have finally conquered the New Orleans Saints. I'm never going to get tired of saying that. But with all of that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for this week's episode of the Cannon Fire podcast. Thank you so much to everyone hanging out with us here in the live stream. Our buddy TB12, Goatman, Amdam S, Nestor Cervantes, The Truth, Russ Weeks, Tony Baloney, and anybody else that I had mentioned before. We truly appreciate you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't for more great Tampa Bay Buccaneers content. We will be dropping another podcast this week. I'm not sure what day it's going to be, but be on the lookout for that. We will be joined by former Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Sean King. Of course, we'll get his thoughts on Monday Night Football, wrapping up Week 13. We'll also get his thoughts on the upcoming game against Brock Purdy and the San Francisco 49ers. Should be a good one. We'll also talk to you later on this week with the game preview edition of the Cannon Fire podcast. Follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show and, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL. And, of course, check out his written work at BucsNation.com. I know you got the weekly staff picks that may or may not be coming out here soon. You have anything else you're working on this week?
No, just the stock report, I guess you could say, where I look at, just a few players who've been playing well recent weeks, a few players who haven't been playing well. So should have 2 things out soon at some point this week.
Hell yeah, it should be a good one. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, you can find myself on social media, Instagram and Twitter at Rhettakus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. But that's the show. We'll talk to you later on this week with former Bucs quarterback Sean King. I am your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We'll talk to you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thanks for listening, and go Bucs.